I wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are really excited to bring a really robust group of experts to you to discuss greening the finance. I'd like to first introduce myself. I'm the Senior Director for Federal Climate Policy at WWF. WWF serves as a lead nonprofit overseeing America's All In. And America's All In is the most expansive coalition ever assembled in support of U.S. climate action, mobilizing a whole of society effort from thousands of U.S. cities, states, tribal nations, businesses, and financial institutions, colleges, universities, faith, it goes on and on. And the coalition is working alongside the federal government to deliver climate impact that meets the urgency of the moment and empowers workers and communities. The America is All In coalition is led by former National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy, UN Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions Mike Bloomberg, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee, Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles, Apple Vice President for Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives Lisa Jackson, and climate champions really across the country. The coalition seeks to have U.S. emissions by 2030, reach net zero emissions by 2050, and reduce the impact of climate disruption. We like to provide these kinds of events for our members and other interested parties to better understand how to lead on climate, and in the case of today's discussion, how to finance it. So first, we would like to kick it off by starting with a broad overview of the green bond market from a municipality that has been placing green bonds for years. Green bonds play an important role in the $4 trillion municipal bond market by targeting municipal finance towards green projects. We will then move to a dynamic discussion about financing green projects and hear from green banks themselves. But first, I'd like to introduce Nikolai Sklarov. Nikolai is the Capital Finance Director from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. He serves as a commissioner on the California Debt and Investment Advisory Commission, and he's a member of the Government Finance Officers Association Debt Committee. As the San Francisco Public Utility Commission Finance Director, Nikolai is responsible for developing, implementing, and administering capital financing activities across the agency, which is comprised of water, wastewater, and power enterprises. He oversees $7.6 billion of outstanding revenue bonds and notes. To date, just to give a bit of context, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has issued $4.3 or so billion in green bonds, ranking it among the largest municipal green bond issuers in the country. I'd like to welcome Nikolai to offer an overview of what the green municipal bond market looks like, what the benefits of green bonds are, and what PUCs need to consider before placing green bonds. And just a note to those who are joining us today, please do feel free to use the Q&A section, and we can try to see if there's any time for Nikolai to respond to questions after his presentation. So please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you to the World Wildlife Fund and the America's All In Coalition for the opportunity to speak to you today. This is a big topic. It'll be a whirlwind discussion, so let me dive right into it. First, for those who aren't familiar with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, we are based in San Francisco, California, but our operations actually extend all the way to Yosemite National Park, where we derive clean, pure water, drinking water for our customers, as well as clean hydroelectric power. And those operations extend across the state of California to the Bay Area, where we serve 2.7 million people around the Bay, including San Francisco, but in other communities as well, as both retail and wholesale customers with water. We also provide wastewater services as well as power. So as you might imagine, with operations beginning in a national park and ending at a national recreation area, environmental stewardship is deeply ingrained in our mission and our DNA. And it was natural for us to adopt green bonds as an early adopter. For those who are not familiar with green bonds, it's a label that is applied to the bonds to describe how the bonds are being used. But the security itself, what is the promises being made to investors, are the same as our other bonds. It's purely about how we are using those proceeds. Since green bonds were introduced, other labels have also been introduced as well. The marketplace began in 2007 and has grown remarkably since then. Now it's about $1 trillion market, of which the public finance market, the market for state and local governments, is still a very small share of the international marketplace, but growing exponentially. The SFPUC first introduced green bonds in 2015. I wasn't at the SFPUC at the time. I happened to be an investment banker on the other side of the transaction. But we introduced the green bond label for our power enterprise, the delivery of sustainable hydroelectric power to customers in San Francisco. And as was typical in the marketplace at the time, as that marketplace was evolving, we self-certified that these bonds were green, and that was typical. Since then, we've introduced green bonds for both of our water enterprise and our wastewater enterprise, and those bonds were certified by the Climate Bonds Initiative. We view this as the platinum standard for green bond certification. There are other ways of certifying green bonds, but with the CBI certification, not only were we demonstrating to investors our alignment with the ICMA's international green bond principles, but also that our program was consistent with the Paris Accord goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5%. In addition to the certification from CBI, we receive a third-party verification by a CBI-approved verifier, which in our case is Sustainalytics. Sustainalytics is a division of Morningstar. So our city first adopted a climate action plan back in 2004. This was a natural extension of that, and we have tried to continue to evolve our program with best practices through the years that have been recognized in Green Bond of the Year awards from Environmental Finance. Last year in 2023, we issued a record number of green bonds, and as Elizabeth mentioned, we've issued about 4.3 billion to date. For the past decade, that's meant we've been one of the largest green bond issuers in the country. But even more recently, if you look at the results from last year, many new issuers are entering the marketplace. New types of labels are being applied, whether it's green bonds, sustainable bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, and the marketplace is growing. And that's exactly what we want to see, which is a growing supply of labeled bonds so that investors will continue to focus their assets on this marketplace. Since 2015, we've issued green bonds consistently. The darker colors are the green bonds, the lighter colors were the non-green bonds, and again, about 4.3 billion to date. So why do we do this? Well, when we issue bonds in the municipal market, we typically do them on a serial basis, which means that a 30-year bond may have 30 different maturities. And we will be issuing both green and non-green bonds, non-green certified bonds at the same time. And overwhelmingly, as you can see in this chart, we see that the demand is coming in first for those green bonds. And we're satisfying the appetite for investors for those green bonds. We're seeing new investors being brought to our program, and we're delivering a product that they are demanding. And our expectation is that it's reducing our costs. Now, when we're actually pricing these bonds at the same time, of course, we're trying to drive down the price for both types of bonds, and we use the additional demand to drive down costs for both series of bonds. Introducing green bonds does entail additional work for our team, not only the process of getting the bonds labeled in the first place and the disclosure in the marketplace, but we have chosen that each year we also issue a green bond report for each of our 3 enterprises that describes how those bond proceeds are being used, and how those proceeds are being used in alignment with UN sustainability goals. So what are the benefits of green bonds for us? First and foremost, an articulation of the values of our organization, uh, but secondarily, a way of expanding our investor base for our bonds and driving down the cost of bonds and ultimately driving down the cost of our rates. We do recognize that green bonds do have challenges. Importantly, they do entail a cost of both time and staff time and staff and money. But we also have an important regulatory responsibility. The SEC has been clear that all of the disclosure we provide to the investors is subject to the anti-fraud provisions of federal securities law. The same holds true for the information that we provide about our green bonds. So it requires care and diligence by our attorneys as well. But we remain committed to green bonds. We're continuing to evolve our best practices. It's already public information that we anticipate issuing an RFP to introduce third-party verification for all three of our enterprises going forward. And Elizabeth, after that quick whirlwind, happy to turn it to you for any questions.
Thank you, Nikolai. And it was, I mean, there was a lot of information. I kind of, we asked you the impossible task of talking about green bonds in 5 minutes. So we really appreciate you doing that. I don't know that I see any questions in the chat so far, but I will have moderators privilege here. I will ask one of my own. You know, you talked about the subscription and sort of that I think it was slide 14 that sort of showed that there were the level of interest for green bonds is certainly higher than for other types of bonds. I'm curious for your thoughts on what you're seeing. Clearly, those are really great trends. I'm also curious, though, if you see the potential for bond, those who want to place a bond to use a definition that is not quite as robust as San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, for instance. Is that a concern?
A couple of points. First, I think what we do is not typical. We have intentionally used higher standards and provide additional work. You can do a green bond with a lot less effort as well. But it's an important articulation of our organization's values to do what we're doing. Number two, I think many people are focused on the pricing differential, and we too are focused on that. We have many conversations with investors, but I think to focus exclusively on the pricing differential is to lose focus on the real mission here, which is to articulate how we're using our proceeds to address climate change and mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Thank you so much, Nikolai. I have one more question I'm going to add to the mix, which is if you could talk about the types of investors who are interested in purchasing green bonds, and what new investors, new investors to the green bond market, what that does to the market.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the evolution of the green bond market is it was promised to investors that they could get the benefit of investing in green bonds without giving anything up in yield. And of course, it's been marketed to us as issuers that we would eventually have a pricing benefit. And what we're hoping to see is that as the marketplace continues to grow, as funds are continuing to be set up with an exclusive focus on green bonds, that will build in the demand to see that pricing differential. We see the pricing differential very clearly in the international taxable marketplace. In our smaller marketplace, we see anecdotal evidence of that pricing benefit, but we'd like to see it happen more consistently as the marketplace grows.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Nikolai. I really appreciate you getting up early in San Francisco and joining us today. That was a great presentation, and we promise to come back to you when we have a lot more questions.
Thank you so much.
So now I would love to introduce a former Treasury colleague who is going to act as moderator for this next session. But we'll start off with to offer an overview of Treasury's important role in relation to community development financial institutions. Noel Pollo is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Economic Development at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Noel has served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Economic Development, or OSED, since February 2021, managing a portfolio that includes the CDFI Fund, or the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, the Emergency Capital Investment Program, and the OSED Policy Team. He also led the Emergency Rental Assistance and Homeowner Assistance Fund programs. Pollo's 20-plus year career has focused on integrating immigrants and low-income households into the mainstream financial services and real estate sectors, and on improving the livability and economic resilience of low-income neighborhoods and affordable housing communities. That's a lot. He's also a graduate of Yale, excuse me. So Noel, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and I'd like to turn it over to you.
Elizabeth, really appreciate to America's All In. I'm really pleased to be here, and it's great to see you again. So just very briefly, for those that are not in this space as deeply, a community development financial institution is a financial institution or a lender that is certified by the Treasury Department's CDFI fund. And it is certified for being a mission-focused organization that is accountable to the communities that it serves. There has been a really historic investment in CDFIs, as well as minority depository institutions, MDIs, which are designated by regulators based on their minority ownership or control. And so, at the Treasury Department, we have been focused, certainly at the very, very first days when we came in the Biden administration, focused on delivering capital equitably to communities that have not been served as well in our country's financial ecosystem. And of course, we have gotten increasing resources not only to do that, but also to focus on climate finance with the IRA and a variety of other resources. And so when we put those two sort of together, we think about that as community, a climate-focused community finance. That is to say, climate finance that recognizes and invests with a recognition that low-income communities and financially underserved communities have been disproportionately and are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And so that's a space where we've done a lot of policy work. My team has done that. But of course, our IRA implementation team is doing enormous work, particularly with the IRS and our tax policy team to implement the provisions of the IRA that have been with which Treasury has been charged. So enough about Treasury and about my work. Let me turn to the star-studded lineup that makes up the rest of this webinar. Let me just go through, if everybody will bear with me, a set of introductions here, and then we will just smoothly move from presenter to presenter. And so I will give you 4 brief bios that give you a sense of why this is such an exciting webinar. Katie Walsh is the head of climate finance for cities, states, and regions, and the North American lead for CDP. She is, the CDP is a not-for-profit organization that runs the world's largest measurement and disclosure system for investors, companies, and governments to manage their environmental impacts. And so Katie previously served as a fellow in the Mayor's Office of Sustainability in Philadelphia, a fellow at the U.S. Department of Energy, Policy, and International Affairs Office. She's a Fulbright scholar in Taiwan. Needless to say, Katie is a true expert in her field. After Katie, you'll hear from Stephen Morrell, the Chief Executive Officer of the Montgomery County Green Bank. Stephen, in this role, he oversees the Green Bank's programs and financial products that are dedicated to drawing in commercial capital and accelerating the climate goals of Montgomery County, Maryland. Prior to the Green Bank, he honed his expertise and deep interest in this space in investment banking research, commercial banking, and international project finance, among other things. And he has a degree from Johns Hopkins. Bert Hunter will follow. He's the EVP and Chief Investment Officer of the Connecticut Green Bank, which is the nation's first state-level green bank. He leads a team of investment professionals that develop innovative financing programs and sources of funds for deployment in this space. and he serves on the boards of Climate Justice Fund, PACE National, Inclusive Prosperity Capital, in a range of organizations. And then finally, we'll go to Nina Young, who's Director of Policy and Network at the Coalition for Green Capital. And in this role, before joining Green Capital, Nina worked in the community economic development space for a decade, supporting low and moderate income communities with affordable housing development, community planning, and small business lending. She earned her master's in environmental management from the Yale School of Environment. This is why I signed up to moderate this one. I'm excited to hear from the team. Katie, may I turn it to you to begin?
Thank you so much. And I do have a couple slides that I would love to share. So I'm just going to pull them up right now. Give me 1 second. Okay, and back to the top. Great. Well, I will get started as the Zoom screen share catches up with me. But I am Katie Walsh, and I work at CDP. As introduced, we are the world's largest disclosure system for companies, cities, states, regions, and public authorities to track and measure their environmental impacts. My focus today is going to be more on some of the data points that we get from projects seeking financing, but I wanted to just show you the scale and size of the global impact of the number of companies disclosing and regional and local governments, over 1,000 globally, 23,000 internationally. And we do this so that we can offer an effective way to understand what these entities are doing and how much further they need to go. So we're aligned with international global standards around climate-related financial risk, as well as, again, what the science requires us to do. I am focusing just today on the work of our public finance team. And so what we support these entities, city, state, and regional governments, as they're disclosing through CDP, they're highlighting projects that are seeking financing. We then go through this. We support the local governments as they're disclosing their projects and disclosing overall on their climate action. And we are also then pulling out insights and data points that we can use to further their funding and financing ambitions for climate action. So this is a global endeavor, so it looks very different depending on where we are working in an international context. But anything that then can be linked to funding and financing opportunities and project preparation support. CDP is also able to convene different types of stakeholders as we have a representation of about 700 different kinds of financial institutions that are requesting the disclosure and data from companies and local governments, as well as the companies themselves, who in the instance of here in the US working on IRA funding are key partners in being able to finance and fund the ambition that we are seeing from local governments. The information we collect, I think what we have heard from different stakeholders is projects alone are not the whole picture, and you really do need to understand how a project that is seeking financing is nested within a locale. And so is that place also working on vulnerability assessment? Are they also working on identifying how to drive down their emissions to ensure that any type of project that gets implemented is in an overall again, geography that is really understanding how climate is going to impact them. So the role of disclosure overall on climate is germane to looking at the projects that are seeking financing. So you're doing both at the same time in terms of looking at your disclosure. So diving in, this is a question that is in a larger set of questions related to CDP disclosure. This is again going to the cities, the counties, state governments, and public authorities. We are asking local governments to tell us what projects are seeking financing, what the stage of development is, the status of financing, if they've identified a financing model. So we heard earlier about green bonds. Have they identified a financing model, and if they have the total cost and investment needed? So I'm gonna share with you what we pulled from last year of the overall disclosure from city governments and what we saw of the over 1,000 city and state governments, we had over 703 cities who were disclosing projects seeking financing. So this is over 2,500 projects seeking 162 billion, seeking 70 billion in projects seeking financing. And this was a significant increase over the last 2 years in terms of being able to use the CDP disclosure platform as a source for infrastructure projects seeking financing. I'm going to just show you specifically for the US. So this is the ambition of projects seeking financing from US cities and counties. So we saw 130 US cities reporting in 2023, 436 projects that are seeking financing. And I'll go through and show you what sectors they're in and the status of financing. And they're looking for about $28 billion in investment. So these are projects that local governments, again, have identified that will help them achieve their climate resiliency, their climate mitigation goals, their equity-related goals that are in need of financing. Across the board, again, this reflects us going through the different sectors and identifying what is reported and self-reported by these local governments. About 70% have this focus on mitigation. This is not to say that local governments do not have a lot of adaptation and resilience needs, but this is what is being reported at the moment to CDP in 2023. And we wanted to kind of call out this interesting point around about 20% of them are projects that are under about 500,000 that are seeking financing. And the stage of development in terms of about half are in this early stage of project development. We use definitions that have been established under the umbrella of the City's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is aligned with an understanding of what do we mean when we talk about stage of development, but those that is defined broadly. And so we've pulled that into pulling out about half of them are in the early stage of development. So where are these projects? This is again from 2023. The number reflects the number of projects that came in from that state, and again, it's being reflected by being disclosed by a city or a county. So you can see the spread. Of course, we still see gaps in the map. We work with anyone who wants to disclose to CDP. So if you are someone who's on the line and you don't see your city or state reflected, or you want to know if your local government has disclosed, I'll feature that at the end of the presentation. But this kind of shows you that the demand is coming from all over for the projects that are seeking financing. And the sectors that we wanted to call out is of what was reported in, the majority you can see are in buildings and energy efficiency, transportation and renewable energy. And so these are projects that are seeking financing across the US. We do have, I will call in and call out the sector that has other, that is where we do have a lot of local governments who are putting in different types of adaptation and resilience projects. But to highlight buildings, energy efficiency, and transportation being the majority of projects that are coming in. Again, this is just a little bit more of a detail to see the projects by cost range of the under 500,000 and sort of that spread of scale and potential for funding under these IRA opportunities. And stage of development, so that 47% of the early stage of development, I mean, what is that in actual numbers? It's about 206 projects are in early stage, and 227 projects coming in are mid stage. I will just share an example of a US project that was reported. We've got this one from the city of Miami, and then we have another one from Austin, but of a building and energy project looking to expand a project around low and middle income homeowners and retrofitting, and looking for additional financing models. And then City of Austin working on their Austin Transit partnership to support and expand the public transportation network. CDP offers a lot of different resources. So what I would invite you to look at is we have this global snapshot. So we're just pulling the presentation together for you today, which is static. But you can actually go in and just move around and actually click on the different countries, then click on the different locations, and then have it pop up so you can actually see the projects and the level of detail that's been reported. So that's in the global snapshot, as well as kind of calling out our US infrastructure. We also put out a guide last year, before several of these big grants have come out. But the Sustainable Infrastructure Financing Guide for US cities, I think, is still incredibly relevant because it talks a lot about project structuring and development. And to complement that is this last guide on making sustainable infrastructure equitable. So as you're developing your sustainable infrastructure projects, doing so with a focus on racial and social equity outcomes. The data that I featured today, the analysis side of it being available on the snapshot, you can also get into the raw data. And so that is on our open data platform. We can provide the links following this, but you can access the open data platform. In that, you can explore all these different data sets that CDP makes available from the disclosure, and specifically to be able to pull out any of these projects that are seeking financing, if that is something that you want to look further into. And lastly is an invitation. So we are going to be working with cities, counties, states, and public authorities. This is an opportunity to participate, to disclose, to get your projects highlighted, to be able to bring them into venues like this, and then to connect them with specific resources. And we'll open up in June of this year. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Great. Katie, thank you so much. And it's clear that having a baseline like this is going to be so important as the implementation of the IRA. We start to see that upswing. So this is just enormously important baseline data. Stephen, we were talking about local government work. I'd like to turn to you, Stephen Morrell.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much for the kind words in the introduction. And thank you to WWF for having me on the seminar today, as well as hosting this important initiative. My name is Stephen Morrell, CEO of the Montgomery County Green Bank. And just for reference for everybody, that's Montgomery County, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. There are many Montgomery counties across the U.S., and maybe one day we can help represent them, but we are focused on a specific geographic region, which is Montgomery County. For those of you not familiar with the Green Bank trend, it actually has an interesting history starting at a national level. You'll find green banks that popped up in the United Kingdom, Australia, Singapore, other countries. And when the trend came to the United States, starting at a state level that you saw with Connecticut, New York, and other states as well, we were one of the first established at the county level that was funded by the county legislature here in order to accelerate investment in clean energy, energy efficiency, and what now includes climate resilience. And so from the public-private partnership perspective, we exist solely to grow a limited amount of public resources into private sector investment. We are not a traditional bank. The Green Bank moniker is important, though, because we do work with all of the local financial institutions to achieve that mission. Community banks, CDFIs, larger banks, investment funds, all to help draw in that type of capital for the projects that are necessary in Montgomery County. So we do have a very significant focus on the climate impacts and how we actually accelerate the county's ambition with respect to their climate action plan, but how we actually achieve those impacts within the most vulnerable communities within Montgomery County, and a large focus on how we have an equitable transition. And so we use purpose-driven capital through a variety of different financial instruments in order to be able to catalyze that investment, but also to reach those impacts. And so those types of investments include things that mitigate risk, credit enhancement type products that we can put out there to help others invest, as well as products that can help lower the cost of capital to make projects viable in order to get those done within the community. So we've been a proud partner in Montgomery County since originally chartered in 2016, really got moving in 2017, and excited for this conversation today, but also generally excited to continue to grow rapidly with the IRA and every other opportunity that's popping up in the space. So thank you.
Great, Stephen, really appreciate it. We'll go from the local level to the state level. Bert, I want to turn to you.
Great, Noel. Thanks. Thanks so much. Good to be with all of you, and thanks also to the WWF for bringing this panel together. By the way, I'm a huge Gina McCarthy fan, and proud to say that for a time we had the benefit of having her on our board of directors. So a little shout out to Gina there. She's amazing. So the Connecticut Green Bank's mission is to confront climate change by accelerating investment into our state's green economy with the objective to create more resilient, healthier, and equitable communities. We do that pursuant to a comprehensive plan, which is available on our website, and it's a great website, so I would encourage you to go there. Green banks has been suggested. We're public sources of capital. We work with private sources of capital and leverage this capital into the projects that we fund. And our green bank, on average, attracts about $7 of private capital for every dollar of our own public capital. We're using this capital for financing programs for homes, businesses, and communities with a goal of no less than 40% of investment reaching vulnerable communities. Vulnerable communities is a particular term in our statutes, but that includes low-income and disadvantaged communities. So we're fully aligned with the Biden administration's Justice 40 goals. These low-income and disadvantaged communities are the communities that the EPA is particularly targeting with $27 billion in Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grants under the Inflation Reduction Act, which you all know is the largest climate bill in our country's history. I'm not sure you caught the news. It's been a buzz for all of us, but selections for $20 billion of these grants were announced last week. So you can imagine that Steve and I and Nina are all busy with that process. Back to our green bank, we're a team of 55. Our balance sheet is about 250 million. And we get about $30 million in revenue from public sources each year, mostly coming from a charge on electric ratepayer bills. It's 1/10 of a penny per kilowatt hour, and another $20 million from revenue from our portfolio and renewable energy credits. When we were established in 2011, our primary focus is on clean energy efficiency, and clean transportation. And we've done that with some really innovative programs. Some of those involve a solar lease program for homeowners, businesses, towns, and schools. And another is commercial property assessed clean energy, or CPACE, which most of you are probably familiar with, but if you're not, it's a special assessment that goes on properties to secure investments in energy efficiency and solar. And that special assessment allows us to secure that investment, as well as go for a longer period of time. In our case, we've even done some hydro for 35 years, although more typically between 15 and 20, 25 years. When it comes to green bonds, we issued our first green bonds in 2014 when we became the first entity, public or private, to securitize a pool of these commercial pace financings. And 5 years later, we became the first entity, again, public or private, to securitize a pool of solar renewable energy credits. Now, solar has been securitized, solar leases, solar PPAs, and things of that sort, but solar renewable energy credits had not been. So that was an innovation that we were proud of, and that led us to develop the Green Liberty Bond, which we structured to be accessible to the public, requiring an investment only of $1,000. More recently, we've innovated again using the Raise Green platform, crowdfunding platform, to issue Green Liberty notes. And Green Liberty bonds and Green Liberty notes are both verified green bonds in accordance with green bond principles. We use Kestrel verifiers to assure that. But these Green Liberty notes are really amazing. They're available for only $100 or up. You can invest more, but you can start at $100, and they're available every 3 months. So there's always something green that the public can invest with the Connecticut Green Bank. And we've raised so far more than $2 million to fund energy efficiency retrofits for small businesses in a program we manage with Eversource, the largest utility in the state. So a lot of things going on here in Connecticut, a lot of opportunities to invest in green instruments, and thanks again for allowing me some time to talk about a few of those.
Bert, thank you so much. Now I'd like to turn to Nina Young at the Coalition for Green Capital. Nina, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be invited to speak with you all. So as Noelle mentioned, I'm Nina Young, the Director of Policy and Network at Coalition for Green Capital. I'm gonna just give you a brief history of the organization and then save some more of information for the question and answer portion. So Coalition for Green Capital has been around since 2009 with the mission of addressing climate change by accelerating investments in what we call the Clean Power Platform. Based off of the vision of our founder, Reed Hunt, who is the former Federal Communications Commission and chair, the thought is to set up green banks in order to spur the economy and prioritize establishing a national entity. So over a decade ago, that was the intention of the organization. So it has taken us over a decade to get to this point, but the Inflation Reduction Act has really been a catalytic opportunity for us to continue to support the green banks that we work with through the American Green Bank Consortium, while simultaneously establishing a national green bank that will also serve as an national investment tool and partner that can facilitate investments with public and private partners. I'll leave it there because I can talk about our application and what our intentions are with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but I'll pause there.
Great. Well, we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, and what I'm going to do is try and combine what I'm reading in some of the Q&A in the system with some of my own questions. I take a little bit of moderator's prerogative here. I'd like to ask a question and invite each of you to take either end of this. One about the investor side and one about the community side. On the investor side, how are investors, obviously the federal government has become an enormous investor in the space, but how are you seeing the investor side diversify, or who is becoming interested that are new entrants into this space, the opportunities for growth? And then on the community side, it's same basic question is who is becoming engaged in a new way from the community level, and how are they relating to all of this complex finance? So they're broad questions, but let me invite you to take either or both. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just sort of go around to each of you. I'm going to go in reverse order. So Nina, I'm going to start with you, take either one, and then go to Bert, Stephen, and Katie.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I will speak from how CGC is intending to work with the public and private sector, because while we have worked over a decade establishing green banks and have our fantastic green bank partners here on the call, they'll talk about the transactions that they facilitated. A national green bank has not existed, so we are speaking from the perspective of what we hope and intend to do. So within our National Clean Investment Fund application, which the information is available through the EPA website, we intend to invest directly and indirectly in qualified projects. And so our award of $5 billion would, again, I'm using terminology from EPA. I would recommend everyone on the call to go and see what the definition of qualified projects includes. But we will leverage private capital essentially by using the public resources through EPA to crowd in the private resources. And by doing that, we will draw upon a pipeline of projects that we have already compiled, in addition to taking on new projects. And we will do that through financial products like traditional loans, loan guarantees, credit enhancements, and a small portion of equity investments. And so that's the framework in which we're looking at it. And as I mentioned, a portion of our proposal is on the EPA website. So I would highly recommend those on the call to go and look at the proposal to get more details on those components I just spoke about.
Great, that's really helpful. Bert, can I turn to you?
Sure. These green instruments have been around for literally for decades, but if you look at the EPA and the SRF program and states and municipalities issuing bonds, off of those type of programs, but they didn't really call them green bonds. They were green anyway. And some of them are now being qualified as green or ESG type of investments. So, but we've noticed a progression, from those being issued just generally, again, without kind of any designation, to then getting a designation, attracting institutional investors. And now what you're seeing is high net worth individuals, family offices, and get really very involved in this activity, investment activity. And what we're doing, what we've discovered with our Green Liberty bonds and Green Liberty notes, is there's an overwhelming interest by the public in these green instruments. When we issued our first green bond going back to 2019, well, not to 2014, but the first kind of really big one that we issued in 2019, we issued it to one investor. And what was frustrating, we did all this green work and we went out to Las Vegas and started to meet with all the investors. And they said, we don't care about green. We just want to know the yield. So that was disappointing. So we changed tacks and started to approach it via the municipal market. And we found, wow, the more we open this up to more investors, we found that green really does matter. And then we also discovered in that process that individual investors really want to get access to this, but they don't necessarily want to tie up their funds for 15 and 20 years. So that's why we came up with this Green Liberty Note to kind of give individual investors an opportunity to support green, but do it on a limited basis so they can have access to their funds within a year. So we're seeing great interest. This been borne out in our activities, and it's been borne out in surveys that we've done.
Great, that's really helpful. Stephen, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what Bert is saying, that when we see opening up to new investors, we see a lot of opening up to investors that didn't recognize how important what they could invest in actually was to both their return and their own purpose. And just to give a personal story, a lot of my history, like you mentioned, has been in project finance at a national and international level. And so it was very unique for me to come to a county level institution to figure out what are the levers here and how they're different than trying to put together a large structured finance that ultimately ends up securitized and elsewhere. And the answer was that there was already a form of business for a lot of small businesses, property owners, developers, on how they worked with lines of credit, how they worked with senior secured facilities with their local community banks. And even though that included a lot of energy activities that we could see were happening, they didn't really recognize that there was an economic value proposition to looking at these just by themselves, and how you would actually underwrite that from those local banks' perspectives, different than what was already in the market. And so I think from our perspective, one of the biggest value adds that we brought to the county, and I think at this local level, is how to disrupt that, to really focus on the economic value proposition, the proposition of a financial strategy to actually achieve a lot of the environmental and economic objectives that these small companies have. And we've been able to help really raise the awareness among the local banking institutions of how they can participate in that. And to me, that's been kind of one of the most exciting parts of unlocking a new market here.
Great. And Katie, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I'll add on that. I mean, I would say broadly speaking, the shift that's happening in the financial sector, I mean, there's a lot of different research that you can read in terms of this great transfer of wealth that's happening, to millennials and women in particular, who frankly do not want to see their projects, their funding going towards projects of the past, right? Projects that are not addressing equity, projects that are not addressing climate and sustainability. And so, I mean, that is underway. That is what's happening. And so you have this, increasing awareness among investors who are looking for, I mean, that's why the increase in green bonds is there, because you have this increase in interest from investors looking for these types of opportunities, looking for projects that can demonstrate how the outcomes and the impacts are going to have, this local impact on the ground. And, I would add to that in terms of on the city, the state, the county, the local side, there's a shift that's also happened in terms of how cities and counties and local governments are doing their planning and, kind of the unacceptable, what we have come to understood, right? Planning of the past. Now, communities are part of that discussion. And a lot of the local governments who might have been, vanguards in their own right doing this for a couple of years, but you are broadening the engagement of communities, historically marginalized communities, low-income communities, low and moderate income communities, communities of color, and having a seat at the table. And through that process, that means actually addressing these issues that we're talking about today in terms of climate pollution and disproportionate impacts. So that, we can see the shift right in the financial sector, but it's also what local governments and are accountable for and responsible for and taking action on, and that's also presents this opportunity.
I want to pick up on a point you're exploring there, Katie, and ask this kind of as a lightning round. We've got a little bit of time left, and so I want to invite anybody to jump in and just ask you to please be brief. What is the state of certification and measurement? That is to say, that this field is going to grow in an enormous way. I don't think it takes a crystal ball to figure that out. And so how do we know whether it's good for the climate? How do we know whether it's good for low-income communities? And how do we know that we're putting these things together well? I'm interested in your reflections on the state of certification and or our ability to measure the impact of this work. And anybody can jump in, please.
Well, I'll kick it off. I mean, I think that it just in broad strokes, it comes down to being accountable to the public. I mean, we're public institutions. Our institution, Steve's institution, the institutions that fall behind CGC that Nina is addressing. And so it's incumbent upon us to be able to demonstrate that everything that we're doing is promoting clean activities, green activities, and we've done that from day one. It's not easy, but it takes discipline. It takes data management systems and all this, but it kind of feeds together. Not only are you able to demonstrate accountability, but it also then helps in financing, because investors in these securities want to know that there's no greenwashing going on, and that what you're really doing is having an impact. But to your point, whether it's having, but that impact measurement is also broadening. So it's broadening beyond just clean energy measures or emissions measures and things of that sort, but into the activities that the EPA is getting to, that Nina and Steve and I have talked about with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And that is making sure communities are impacted positively. So all of these metrics are going to be important in terms of not only demonstrating that we're using government and public funds responsibly, but we're also meeting the investment goals that people who are investing in green bonds and green securities are looking for.
Let me invite one more brief remark, and then I've got to turn back to Elizabeth.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll just add one quick remark that I agree completely with what Bert is saying. And I think where you'll see a distinction is a lot of the parties who are being engaged now due to the IRA, the CDFIs, the green banks, other similar focused entities are impact entities at the end of the day, and their strategy is about being an impact fund. And that's very different. People at the national discourse forget the difference between ESG and impact strategy, where ESG is really that reporting retroactive look at data, and impact is a strategy where you are held then accountable for both a return perspective and an impact perspective. And so I feel as though we're really now crowding in a lot of those entities to be focused on that impact strategy. And that'll make a huge shift in how we actually see the validity of reporting moving forward, and less about issues of greenwashing. And I'm excited about that.
This has been an enormously rich conversation. I really appreciate, especially digging into the difficult issues here and in short responses to questions. Elizabeth, let me turn it back to you, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate.
Absolutely, Noelle. Thank you so much for taking this on. Again, we asked a lot of you by asking you to really bring in all of these experts in a way, and not, with not hours and hours of time. We certainly could have spent a lot more time digging into the issues. I just kind of wanted to highlight a couple of things that resonated. First of all, thank you again to Nikolai at the beginning for going through the green bond market. Clearly, this market continues to grow. It's robust. The pricing component is one that is that shows that the demand is high. That then, of course, came through in the discussion with all of the green banks and with Nina. And we would really look forward to hearing more from you and your colleagues about the National Green Bank and how that grows, and how that will really feed into this amazing ecosystem among green financial institutions. Katie, thank you for talking about the sort of scope of projects. I love the point that you made that projects are not the full picture. You really need to look at the locality goals and understand that. But, a growth of 63% in projects in 2 years is pretty remarkable. So I really appreciated that point as well. I think, Bert, your point on the fact that there is an overwhelming interest for green investment is very well taken, and one that clearly we want to follow through. So I will just say that this is going to be the first of a few conversations. We do want to bring finance into our discussions more regularly. Please reach out to us. Let us know if there are points of interest or things you think are worth digging into. We're always happy to look into that. Just to flag a few things coming up. So first of all, anyone who leads an organization or is part of an organization that's interested in joining America's All In, you can go to our website. There's information there. For events, we have a webinar coming up on the land sector. Our colleagues at the University of Maryland put out an amazing report on agriculture in the land sector, so look for that. And then we have a tour, and Gina McCarthy, Bert, you'll be happy to know, will be hitting the road with some colleagues. And we're headed to Houston, Washington State, Cleveland, and others. And so she or someone else, some other leaders as part of the coalition, will be out in the United States trying to highlight the wonderful work going on in various cities and states. So thank you again to everyone who joined today, to all of our panelists. We really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.